Hi, everyone. Hi.
Hello.
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 Thanks for joining us, everyone. Welcome to our live stream. Today, we're going to be discussing the role that pronunciation played in our language learning journeys. I can see we've already got a couple people in the audience. So do say hi. Let us know where you're joining us from. We love to hear from you. I'm Chris. I'm joining from our office in Oxford. And today I'm joined by Sebastian, Małgosia, and Robin, who I think are all joining from different corners of the world. Hi, guys. How's it going?
Hi,
Yeah,
Chris.
really good.
Good. Well, it's great to have you with us here today. So, for those in the audience just joining now, today we're going to be talking about the role that pronunciation played in our language learning journeys. Now, as you know, everyone's language learning journey is unique. We all have our own voice, our own accent, our own mother tongue that it's based on. But pronunciation plays a major role in everyone's language learning journey, no matter what. So today we wanted to share our experiences of learning and teaching English and explore the impact that pronunciation had on our stories and those of our learners, and maybe hear some of your stories too. Often when we do these live streams, they're often very practical. They're often very focused on tips and ideas, and we really wanted to talk about experiences in this one. So we're going to be sharing a lot of stories, and we'd love to hear some of yours. If you want to share, if you hear anything that feels familiar or raises a thought, if you want to share in the comments, please do. We'd really appreciate it. So to kick us off, firstly, just hi everyone. It looks like we've actually got people from all over the place. We've got someone joining from Vietnam, people joining from Pakistan. So thanks for joining, everybody. But to kick us off, I wanted to just open with all of us kind of introducing ourselves. So Sebastian, Małgosia, and Robin, I wanted to ask if you could tell us all if you're a native speaker, a non-native speaker, and what you're doing with English now. So Sebastian, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, Chris. Well, thank you, and it's nice to be here. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this live stream. I was born and raised in Argentina. Clearly, I'm not a native speaker. Now that you hear how I do, I mean, I now live in Mexico, and I've been living here for the past 13 years. English in my case been sort of ever present in my life. Originally in education, because I learned so, because I had some additional classes in PLSs, but mostly because in my professional life I used English in most of my jobs throughout my career. So I mean, pronunciation, language, using of English in the day-to-day sort of work, it's been something extremely important for me, and continues being, and I guess is going to be for quite some time.
Wonderful. How about you, Małgosia?
Hi, I'm Małgosia. I live in Poland. I was born and raised here. I'm a teacher trainer. I started learning English as a child. I was 10 years old, and my parents decided to send me to extracurricular English lessons. And probably they did it just, I don't know, for fun, because hello, Beata. In those days, we couldn't really see any practical use of a child or knowing English. And then, rather unexpectedly, I decided to study English, and then I became a teacher, and then a teacher trainer. So my sort of journey with pronunciation is like first as a learner, then as a teacher, trying to teach pronunciation to my students, and now as a teacher trainer, trying to help other teachers to deal both with their own views of their own pronunciation, and also with how to teach their students.
Wonderful, thanks. And Robin, do you want to finish this off?
Yeah, so I'm the odd one out in the group because I'm the native speaker, and I think doubly odd in that I actually trained and became a teacher of chemistry and physical sciences in Newcastle in the north of England, where I was born. So pronunciation had nothing to do with my life until I landed in Spain, which is where I now live. And when I was retraining and gaining a qualification in ELT, one of the components was pronunciation, and I found it utterly fascinating. And that started me off down the road of, apart from going out there and teaching and earning my daily bread, so to speak, actually investigating pronunciation more and more. And I've spent the last 20 years more or less doing that, and had some publications based on teaching the pronunciation of English. And close to full retirement, it still absolutely fascinates me. It's what gets me up in the morning, and if I see anything on the internet to do with the pronunciation of English, then I'm in there reading it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you all, and yeah, thank you for joining us to discuss all of this. So I want to kick us off with our first real question, and this is a question for mainly you, Małgosia and Sebastian, but also really for everyone in the audience. So if you're watching, do feel free to kind of post your thoughts about this. We'd really like to hear from you and see if our experiences align with yours at all. But what I really want to ask everyone to do is to think back to the beginning, the very start of your language learning journey, when you were struggling, making mistakes, when you're translating individual words instead of communicating freely, right back when you're still getting to grips with English and it's this new part of this new thing you're learning. And I want to ask, back then, what role did pronunciation play? Was it something you concentrated on? Did you feel confident about it? Was it difficult? So let us know in the comments. And Małgosia, do you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you. So as I've already said, I started learning as a child, and then pronunciation wasn't an issue. My first teacher was an ex-RAF pilot who had no experience, probably, and no background in teaching, but he followed his intuition. And then at university, so at first pronunciation just wasn't an issue. I didn't realize that there is such a thing until the moment when I was still a child. My great uncle visited us. Again, he spent some time in the UK after the war. And my grandma asked me to read to him a passage from my course book. And I did. And I can't remember what it was, but I imagine it was something like, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson are sitting in their living room, their dog, blah, blah, blah. And this great uncle said, oh, she's got good accent. And of course I didn't, but this was the first time I realized that there is such a thing and that an accent can be good or bad, right? So this was like first time that I remember about pronunciation and the way, not just grammar and vocabulary, but something else. And then at university, we were expected to achieve the near-native pronunciation, and the RP was the model. And actually, it was the only model I heard for quite a long time, mainly from recordings. And of course, it was completely unattainable. And we didn't get any practical training. It was very theoretical. So I can still tell you, that, for example, P is like bilabial plosive, but then I didn't know how to pronounce it. And then I went for the first time to the UK, and someone was saying to me, it's hot, pointing to the sun, and I didn't get it. Now, he was an American, which kind of, sort of, I wasn't completely used to this pronunciation, but I started doubting myself. I started thinking, well, what am I doing studying English? I'm not good at it. I spent, I wasted 2 years. And then I became a teacher. And for a long time, I was afraid to speak English to my students because I felt my pronunciation is not good enough and I will not be a good model. And it took me really a long, long, long time of thinking, reading, attending different training to change my mindset and to get the confidence in using English and to understand that I don't have to be perfect to be a teacher and to be a model. Okay, I think I've been talking for too long, so now.
No, that was great. That was great. Thank you. Sebastian, how about you?
Well, that was great indeed. I sort of relate to some of the things that Małgosia has mentioned, but I kind of generated that self pressure of wanting to sound as a native speaker very early on in the learning process. I remember being in primary school, taking lessons from school and some lessons from a small PLS just to sort of support and improve the learning journey. But I sort of pushed myself because I wanted to sound as a native speaker. And the reference that this is the mid 80s, so I'm sort of giving away my age, but this is a time in which the references I had were movies or songs, and I sort of listened to recordings, watched videotapes, tried to sort of tape out from a TV screen in VHSs the subtitles. There was no, DVD or functionalities to erase that, and then taping myself and wanting to sound like that. And even though from the learning from the classes itself, I was receiving good feedback around the pronunciation, still the push for myself was that I wanted to get to that level. So in a way, it started to create some sort of stress, and that stress sort of started. I started to have some doubts, as you have, Małgosia, around, well, am I doing this correctly? Am I good for learning English? Because in the end, I'm not sounding in the most perfect way. And I kept that for quite some time. There was a breaking point when I was a teenager. I got to speak for the first time with a native speaker, and I realized that even with some errors, with some mistakes, with an accent that came from, that still as a non-native speaker, I couldn't sort of suspend or take away from my speaking. But at that point, I realized that it wasn't that much of an issue. But for quite some time, it helped me to improve the pronunciation. It was something, as I said, I focused on, but it took me some time to sort of get relief from that stress. It helped me to improve, but probably at some time created some stress, unnecessary stress in the learning process.
Okay, that's quite interesting. It's interesting as well how you both mentioned this idea of perfectionism, and trying to sound like a native speaker, but actually what mattering is communication. And I think in the audience we've had some people saying similar things. So Mohammed, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. What if someone pronounces English efficiently, but they have a problem with the accent? And I think there's a distinction here between that idea of striving for a perfect accent, but pronouncing English in a way that does allow you to communicate effectively. And we've actually had someone, I think, reply to that, Catherine saying, accent isn't important, pronunciation is key and essential to be understood in all languages. So I think it is interesting having that distinction where that sort of perfectionism played a role in some ways making it more difficult to actually achieve effective pronunciation. So it's interesting hearing you've got similar experiences there. I wanted to ask, building on what you've just said, and Robin, you might want to weigh in here. When learners are starting a language, how should we approach pronunciation teaching? What is it that will give learners the confidence to speak and make mistakes?
Well, I think anyone who's been in a classroom and who's incorporated pronunciation teaching into their own work, they'll have spotted that some things have a greater impact on their students' intelligibility than others. And so it's very much a question of focusing on what matters. So, my own pronunciation journey was learning Spanish. And for at least 2 years, and it might have been a bit longer than that, apparently I articulated the t and d wrongly. I did it as an English native speaker, and it's a slightly different point of articulation. My wife knew this perfectly. She taught Spanish in Scotland for 3 years. She knew all about how Spanish works in terms of pronunciation, and she did absolutely nothing to correct me because the small shift in articulation that I was doing wasn't affecting my intelligibility. And she said, if I brought this up at the beginning, it would have been so hard for you to make that correction because there were so many other things that were more important. And there were a couple of sounds that you couldn't even do. And that's why I focused my help towards you, is to get those sounds that were important and to leave aside the little nuances. And I think whenever we walk into a classroom, we need to work out what matters to my students, which will often be based on their first language and how it transfers across into their pronunciation. What do I really have to do so that they are as quickly as possible intelligible, which is not the same as what do I have to do to eliminate any traces of their mother tongue. And that's the way a lot of pronunciation teaching has been done. And, you know, if you can't do the ship-sheep difference, then we can't move on. No, sorry, it just isn't like that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, that's really interesting. And there's been a lot of talk around from what you've all been saying about native speakers, non-native speakers, and I'm wondering. You talked a little bit about interacting with each of these groups, and I wanted to ask how interacting with native speakers and with non-native speakers had a different impact on your language learning journeys. Yeah, how did it change the way you approached English? Sebastian, do you want to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Chris. Well, definitely changes because you understand what the nuances are and the importance. Something that Robin mentioned and I really liked from the paper that I think has been shared in the chat, which is the intelligibility. I mean, once you get to be exposed to speak with native and non-native speakers, I started, in my case, in my experience, I started sort of drift away from this idea that everything needs to be flawless. And the intelligibility and the ability to understand, including the accents, the origin accents, the strong accents they might have, either one of these speakers, native or non-native, it's something that builds into, I mean, the understanding and the construction of the conversation. I remember the first time I was exposed to a native speaker was when I was a teenager. I used to play basketball. The club hired an American player, and he came. Was the first time that I sort of was exposed to speaking with a native speaker. And in my mind, again, as I said before, I wasn't perfect, and therefore that sort of limited my ability to express myself in English. And when I got to speak with a native speaker, that sort of changed that perception, because I knew that even with my flaws, even with my strong accent, even with the things I couldn't probably pronounce well, I was making myself understood. And that's a changing point in a way, because I realized that probably, as I said, that the flawless pronunciation is not the key thing, but how for you to make yourself understood. And even with an accent that it's part of your pronunciation, but in the end, it sort of builds on your personality and the way you speak with others. So I guess that's, I mean, it's been for me the moment in which I was exposed to a native speaker, a changing moment in terms of being less stressed, less concerned about that, and more about the fluency. I'm sorry, of part of the bad experiences, the fluency in expressing the message. I think that was in terms more than native or non-native. I think that's the changing point, the turning point.
That's really interesting. And how about you, Małgosia?
Well, I've got another story to tell you. When I first went to England on a teacher training course as a trainee, it was an international group. And our trainers were all native speakers, and they were like top trainers. And I've enjoyed the course a lot. And we were, I think, like 15 different nationalities. And one day during the break, we trainees were standing and chatting. And I think it was a Vietnamese guy who said to me, I prefer to talk to you than to native speakers because I understand you and I don't understand native speakers. And I think my learning journey is marked with these moments which gave me confidence. and those which destroyed my confidence. And definitely this was the moment which gave me confidence and also made me think, so who does the English language belong to? Does it belong to native speakers, or does it belong to all of us using it as a way of communicating? And this was one of those moments which sort of, changed my perspective. Yeah, so that's my story.
I just wanted to pick up on both of what you, Sebastian, and Małgosia are saying, because my journey was towards Spanish, of course, but then in the first 2 years, definitely the first 2 years, one of my best moments in the week was when I met up with a German guy, and we would talk to each other in Spanish, and it was great. It was so easy, and it all flowed. So this was like, oh, wow, I can actually express myself in Spanish. And this was, as you said, Małgosia, it's one of those things that lifts you and you feel more confident, because confidence is so damaging, and pronunciation and confidence work together. But the other thing that was quite revealing for me was that there were some Spanish people that I could talk to in my very simple Spanish still, with its very English pronunciation, and they understood me perfectly. And my father-in-law was one of those people, and I would have long conversations with him, and he understood everything. And then with the same accent, an hour later, I'd meet someone who kept saying, I don't understand you, I don't understand you. And I go, so it's not to do with my accent, which has not changed. It's to do with my listener. And this was so revealing to me. And then my students all confessed the same. Yeah, when we're doing exchange visits to the UK, there are people that there's no way you're going to be understood by them because they're refusing to play their part in the process. And I kept that as a sort of little thing to remind my students, don't always blame yourself. You may be being perfectly intelligible, but the person you're talking to has some sort of block because of your accent, and is blaming your accent for your lack of intelligibility, and it's actually them that are at fault.
Absolutely, I think that's really interesting. There's a comment here which I've just put up, which I think is interesting, which is emphasizing something similar, probably the other way around.
Yeah.
Around how pronunciation matters not just for making yourself understood, but also for understanding other people. So I think
it actually begins there, because the first thing we're doing is receiving. And if you have in your head a vision of how a word should be pronounced, and that vision is completely wrong, then you can't hear that word. If you can't hear a key word in a conversation, how can you know where the conversation is going, and therefore how can you participate? So prior to actually you producing intelligible pronunciation is that you should know how the language is pronounced for your listening.
Absolutely. I think it sounds like lots of people in the audience are agreeing here as well, with a lot of what we've been saying. Someone did have a question which I thought was interesting, because we've talked a lot about this difference between intelligibility and accent, and the fact that we can talk in a way that is perfectly intelligible, that other people can understand, while also maintaining an accent, and sometimes how it's the role of the listener, even if you're intelligible, to work a bit harder to understand you. Someone's asked something related to this, which I think is interesting. So they have heard a bunch of people talking about the importance of intelligibility and speaking with a lingua franca. And they're asking what it means practically, in terms of helping students do this. And I just thought I might pull us onto that kind of practical element there for a second. Is it very broad?
This is what I've been doing for the last 20 years. What's been very interesting, essentially, is that researchers have observed people who are using English between non-native speakers and observed their pronunciation. And the result of all of this, because what's interesting is that it's empirical evidence. It's not done in a lab. It's actually done by putting a recorder in a place like BMW in Frankfurt and recording a meeting with a whole bunch of non-native speakers using English. When you analyze the moments in which their communication fails because of pronunciation, you can then come up with a series of things which have been present every time pronunciation has been successful. In other words, you can come up with quite a short list of core features of the pronunciation of English that are present every time somebody is successful with their pronunciation in English. And that for teachers is incredibly useful. The list is 4 elements long. And, you know, I remember looking at all of the vowels of English and the consonants and then all of the suprasegmental stuff and thinking, I'm never going to get through this. I just don't have time, you know, like I have 20 minutes a week, which I can allow for pronunciation work. And suddenly empirical research has said, focus your 20 minutes a week on these 4 elements of the pronunciation of English. And these 4 elements are called the lingua franca core. It's the pronunciation you most need to work on in order to be understood when English is being used as a lingua franca.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's really interesting. Do you, Małgosia or Sebastian, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's what is great about this core is that, as Robin said, this is like legitimizing something that has already been happening. So it's not that this is wrong, that you can't pronounce schwa. It's just that non-native speakers have problems with it. But even if you do not pronounce schwa, you can be understood, right? So I think it's great that finally what people are doing, because that's what they are doing when they are communicating. If 2 business people or whoever, 2 researchers want to communicate and the only means of communication is English, they are more focused on the content than on the language features. And they use the language the way they can. So all these, you know, features of native speaker English, which, you know, if you want to speak like a native speaker, fine, nobody stops you. But it's not absolutely necessary to communicate. And I think it's great that what people already have been doing has been legitimized and is now something that teachers can focus on, instead of spending a lot of time and, you know, despairing over some features of the language, which, first of all, are not crucial to intelligibility. Secondly, you know, who's a native speaker? Some native speakers pronounce th as th, but some of them pronounce it as d. But in Polish schools, this is something that, you know, pupils are spanked for, about metaphorically, because they have problems pronouncing th. But come on, some native speakers don't do this either, right? So I think that this new approach is to pronunciation is really very relieving, and it's really, you know, way in good direction.
Absolutely. Mohammed in the comments has actually noted the exact same phenomenon.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting.
Unfortunately, I can't comment like Małgosia or Robin based on their vast experience as teaching, because I don't have experience in teaching the language. But probably from the learner side, I think one thing that it's key is building confidence, which doesn't necessarily will come from speaking again flawlessly as a native speaker, but being able to express yourself. The construct of what you're saying and the way to express it, as I said, fluently, is probably more important than the pronunciation as a native. And I guess that's something from the learner perspective that needs to be built into the learning process to be able to communicate in the most efficient way.
The word that we've used, or has come up again and again, and people have different synonyms for it, is this thing about flawlessly. And flawlessly is very dangerous because it supposes that ultimately there is one pronunciation that is the correct, and everything else is a failed version of that particular pronunciation. Well, first of all, would somebody tell me which one it is? And the answer is you can't tell me. And so flawlessly might be flawless for this particular situation, me talking to these particular people. And so flawless would be my accent when I go back to Newcastle and I start talking with a Newcastle accent. But if I then go to San Francisco and keep the same accent, I wouldn't have said that that was flawless. So we need to avoid actually allowing ourselves to be dragged towards the idea that somewhere out there, someone speaks the perfect accent and ultimately that's where we should all go. No, we should speak what is intelligible to the person we are talking to at that particular point in time. And then if you live in a particular place, as I'm living here in Spain and I've been here for 42 years, yeah, of course I dream of waking up one day and not being different and not being recognized as the Englishman in the street. But most of us aren't in that situation. Most of us are using English on a day-to-day basis for work or social reasons. And then flawlessly would be that I adjust my pronunciation to whoever it is I'm talking to facilitate their work as a listener. And I hope that as a listener, they're also making an effort to understand me as a speaker, which is actually quite demanding. I'm saying there isn't a single pronunciation you should attain as a learner. I'm suggesting that as a learner, you get better and better at being able to move your pronunciation until it fits the person you're talking to in a particular moment in time. So it's an ad hoc thing. And that requires a lot of skill. It's very, very skilled, in fact, to be able to do that.
Yeah, because it changes depending on who you're talking to.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think you wrote in your paper, Robin, about accommodation. I think that's another very important thing, that pronunciation is not only what you the way you try to pronounce to impress other people, but the way you speak so that they understand you. Yeah. So if we are talking about stories, I've got another story. I have friends who are German, and we communicate in English because I don't know German. And when I speak to them, especially if we stay together for a longer time, I simplify my English, and I caught myself pronouncing some words, especially like keywords, some more difficult words, with a German accent. Because I want our communication to be going. I don't want to sound, as a competent native speaker or whoever. I just want to communicate. I want them to understand my message. And I think in our global world nowadays, this is also important. But when you talk to someone, you have to meet halfway through.
Yeah.
With this person, and depending on who this person is, you may need to do different things to your own pronunciation for the communication to happen.
Absolutely.
It's a two-way street, Sebastian. You must have lived this so many times through your work, where you're making constant adjustments because this person's not following you. Or
no, absolutely. I was just remembering now that Małgosia mentioned the first time I was exposed to different background English-speaking people, native and non-native, was I used to work many years ago for BMW. They made this conference in a town called Miesbach in the south of Munich, where BMW headquarters are, and there were people from all over the world. And again, I still had one of the first occasions in which I was exposed to people from different backgrounds. One of the first in which I had to speak in English outside of Argentina at the time. And I remember that I didn't have issues in understanding non-natives from different origins, from Asia, from India, from South America, from Europe. But it was almost impossible for me to understand a native speaker, which was a New Zealander. And I had to make an effort to understand someone. And that sort of changed the perception that native is the referent and non-native is something that probably requires some improvement. I mean, the experience in that and the understanding that probably native, non-native is not that relevant, but more the listener side and the two-way communication. I mean, that was clearly a revealing point.
Absolutely.
I remember getting a request. We have a big petrochemicals plant near where I live, and it's also the European base for the administration of the company. It's an American company, DuPont. And I got a request from a guy who worked in the admin block, and he said, I'm on the internet all day with people from the company all around the world, and I'm struggling to be understood and to understand. So we worked together, and I coached him. And we had a series of goals. And after about 10, I think it was 10 sessions together, he came in and he said, it's the last session. I said, fine. And he said, I'm really good at work. I'm really happy. except my boss doesn't understand me still. I said, your boss doesn't understand you? Where's he from? And I was thinking from in Spain, and he said, oh, he's British. So the guy had progressed to being totally competent at work, but not with his boss, which brings me back to my father-in-law when he showed me, I understand you, others don't, but that's their problem. I think this guy's boss. But it's really interesting how very quickly you can solve these problems and help someone. And there may be some people that don't understand, but it's it's more their problem than yours.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to jump in for a second. We've had a question asking if we could suggest a book to help in improving pronunciation. And I just wanted to highlight that we've actually got a paper on this. It's completely free. It's about 30 pages long. Robin wrote it. And it's all about pronunciation for a global world. So there's a link in the comments, and if you go and click on that, that'll take you to that paper. You just need to put your email in, and it'll get sent to your inbox. And that really goes into a lot more detail about some of the things we've touched on today. So if you want something a bit more in-depth and a bit more practical tips, it's got a toolkit at the back. It's got some appendices which will give you some practical ideas. So if you want some more practical stuff you can apply, I would go and download that. So follow the link in the comments if you're interested.
And Chris, next year, OUP will be publishing a book which I'm co-authoring with a colleague in Glasgow, and that's a teacher's resource book. So it's full of actual classroom activities you can take out of the book and go and do in the classroom, all very much aimed at the idea that we're helping our students to be more intelligible. We're not aiming at any accent whatsoever. We're aiming to give them intelligibility for this English that's being used around the world as a lingua franca.
I'm really looking forward to actually getting hold of a copy of that to read it. It's going to be good. I'll actually as well, if you download the paper I mentioned earlier and use your email address, I'll be sending an email around to everyone who downloads that paper to let them know when this book is available. So if you want to get a notification about that, you can go and download the paper. And then you'll get it straight to your inbox. I wanted to bring up something which I thought was interesting. I just thought it was a really nice sentiment. There's two comments here. One of which I'm gonna open with the first one, which is mentioning the fact that in Brazil, students are often taught to speak as close to American or British as possible, and neglecting that there's no problem with speaking English with a Brazilian accent, which is, I think, a real shame. And someone else mentioned, and this is going to be a long one, so I might get cut off the screen.
But Chris, just before you pop the other one up, there's not just a question of there's no problem. Your accent is who you are. And if you're going out into the world and you're Brazilian, then perhaps you want people to know, hello, I'm representing my country.
Absolutely. That's actually exactly what I was going to pop on screen. So someone else has mentioned this one's great. I'm just going to swap with you, Sebastian. You anticipated me. The way you speak is part of your personality, your identity. Speaking a new language shouldn't and can't take away that part of who you are. And we shouldn't be ashamed of where we come from or who we are. Why should we blame ourselves for that? The language you speak is you. Which I just thought was a really lovely comment. I just really
fabulous. It's fabulous.
Yeah, I think it really sums up what we're saying. I wanted to. There's a couple other questions that I wanted to raise from the audience. One I think it is important to clarify. Robin, you might have an answer to this, which is someone is asking if intelligibility might be subjective. Małgosia, you may also want to jump in on this one. And does this lead to an anything goes approach, which could be unhelpful?
Well, I don't think it does, because you might, as a teacher in your classroom, let anything go. Then you're not doing your job. And as a teacher, you know that some things that are typical of the way your students pronounce English are not going to be intelligible. And it's your job to pull them back towards what you know will be more intelligible. But then the students, if they go out and use English and they're not intelligible, then they're going to do something. They're going to modify their English, or they're going to come and ask for help. The minute you discover that nobody understands you when you speak, it just drives you to do something about the way you speak. And that might be done personally through the internet, or you might actually go and ask your teacher, I'm having trouble. I need, such as the guy from the DuPont company here in Asturias, he came to me and he said, I can't do my work. So it isn't to just let anything happen. That would be neglect on behalf of the teacher. And anything won't just happen by itself in the real world, because you'll not be intelligible, and therefore quite subconsciously you'll start modifying the way you pronounce. So standards do exist, and either you go towards them through a trained expert such as your teacher, or you find your way slowly towards them through trial and error.
Absolutely.
And also that's why we've got this core, right? This.
Yes, absolutely.
So these are the like features which you have to master to be generally intelligible.
Right.
So it's not really anything goes, but it's just sort of not putting too much pressure on the because again, it doesn't mean that you can't, as a teacher, you can't teach other features of English, especially if you've got a group of students who, for different reasons, want to come closer to their imagined perfect pronunciation, right? Especially young people nowadays, they want to speak like, you know, their idols, like pop stars they like, or actors or whoever, sportsmen, and that's fine. But the thing is that you've got this core, and this gives you this promise that if you master as a learner, if you master this core, you should be okay in the global world. If you want to sound Scottish, fine. You've got lots of models, lots of resources. You can practice it probably on your own, because I cannot imagine a whole class of 30 students wanting to, you know, speak with a Scottish accent. But nowadays, with you know, the internet, we've got models of every possible accent, so anyone can follow it. But the core is common.
The comment is a valid. It's totally valid. The comment. It's an anxiety about lack of standards. And what I sometimes say when I'm running workshops is I show a picture of ballroom dancing, and say, if you've been brought up to perceive ballroom dancing as dancing, and then I show a picture of break dancing, and I say, when you see break dancing for the first time, you're going to say, well, that's crazy. Anything goes. They do what they want. But sorry, no, anything doesn't go in break dancing. It's got a very, very clear number of movements or types of movements, and they require a lot of skill and a lot of practice. So what is the relationship? Well, it's a relationship of different standards, not of loss of standards, from ballroom dancing to disintegrating into break dance. No, sorry, it's not a lower quality ballroom dancing. It's separate with its own standards. And internationally intelligible pronunciation is not failed native speaker pronunciation. It's a whole other set of standards. There is quite a lot of overlap, but they are quite different, and they require skill, experience, determination, constancy. You've got to work at it. It is not just do what you want.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I did have another question, which I think we've talked a lot. One of the things we talked about before we moved on to that was this importance of your own identity. Language is your identity, is who you are, and really embracing your own mother tongue accent, even when you're speaking in English, and how important that is. And I guess one of the questions for you as teachers, Robin and Małgosia, but also you as a learner, Sebastian, what can we do, or what would have helped you to give learners the confidence to develop their pronunciation skills and embrace their own mother tongue and accent? How can we give them the confidence to really accept that? I'm going to pick on someone. I'm going to go with I would quite like to get a learner's perspective. So, Sebastian, what would have given you more confidence?
Well, I think from my own experience, empowering the students to find their own voice and pronunciation style is key to building this confidence. I mean, as Robin has mentioned, the ability to develop a level of pronunciation that non-English speaking learners have to communicate effectively with speakers from different countries and backgrounds is key, and the teachers play a key role in building this sense of confidence. And I think this means, again, finding a balance between the ability to articulate the expressions in the right way. And in the right way doesn't mean speaking as native, but expressing it in a way that you can, I mean, your message comes through, but also embracing the nuances of each learner's accent and the ways to pronounce. I mean, as I said, I'm not a teacher myself, but recognizing this unique way to speak in the classroom can probably produce this positive effect. And then comes, I mean, when you apply this learning in actual real life situations, probably another way to sort of bring that into life, to give this confidence is based on my experience when you apply that in the real world. I'm remembering one case. I mean, something different than all my experiences was the first time that I needed to get something by speaking in English, not just interacting messages, but negotiating and getting something out of the message that I was giving. And this was, I mean, many years ago, as I had to present, I mean, the proposals for a business decision. In this case, was, I mean, to grant credit lines to some of our customers, and I needed to do so to a group of Japanese people. And I mean, I presented something, and I needed to get their approval for these lines to be granted. And after the presentation, the response, which it wasn't approved or not, it was, this makes sense. Which again, I mean, that built a lot of confidence, because I knew at that point that all the learnings from the classes were actually applied in something real, and not only in communicating back and forth, but in getting something out of the communication. I guess that's how you burn this. You build this confidence.
Robin or Małgosia, do you have any thoughts?
Can I, Robin?
Yeah, by all means.
I think that pronunciation is a very sensitive area, because it's so close to your personality, but also you need to be motivated to work on it. I think it's much easier to, work on grammar, vocabulary, because pronunciation is less tangible. It's more like feeling things. So you really need to be motivated to work on it. And the best way to motivate learners is to give them a chance to actually experience how practical and useful it is. And this can be done through personal contacts where communication is required. And I think it's much better than listening to some video or watching some videos or listening to some podcasts. If you have a real person with whom you want to communicate, and you have to overcome certain, obstacles and hurdles, and you also have to become tolerant to their variety of English. And like nowadays, lots of young people, like school pupils, have an opportunity to take part in different exchanges, right? To see real people, to go and live with real people. And I think one experience like this is more motivating than lots of support from the teacher. The moment when you've got this, a Romanian speaking English, and you have to adjust your English, and you have to try to imagine what they want to say when they say a certain word. It's a long process, but if you've got two human beings, they can work it out. And I think that the more people really communicate in real life, in person, the more motivated they will be to work on that pronunciation, and the more they will understand this concept of intelligibility rather than native speakerism.
Yeah, that makes sense.
My students, you learn so much from them, and they knew that I was keen that they should acquire good pronunciation, good being that it makes them intelligible, comfortably intelligible. And one day they actually said to me, one group said, you know, we really appreciate your efforts, but we can't do very much because there's no mark for pronunciation. And we're sorry, it's university. We've got to go at what gets the marks and gets us through the course. And well, first of all, I appreciated their honesty. Secondly, I thought, well, what am I doing here? And thirdly, I thought, well, what you're doing is you're going to invent a way of giving a mark, but it's not going to be listening to them do sheep differences. So I thought about this for a while and then decided, okay, they can have structured conversation, or they can actually do dialogues, which we've worked on in class, and they can give it to me on it was a cassette. There's no digital technology there. So I get these great piles, you know, a bag full of 30 cassettes, and the students had done whatever work I'd set. We practiced it beforehand. I'd said the focus of this particular recording that you're going to do with your colleagues is this bit of pronunciation of English. And I would give them the work back with a mark, show them where their pronunciation on the actual written script. I'd show them where they'd made pronunciation mistakes. And it was massively motivating for them. And it did a huge amount for their confidence. I was very, very surprised at how much it altered their perception of the value of pronunciation. And they themselves were also really surprised because on one particular day, I gave a piece of work back and the students said, it's not mine. And I said, yes, it's yours. And they said, no, it's not mine. It's got an 8. It's 8 out of 10. I don't get 8 in English. I said, it is yours. That's your name. I got 8. And I said, yeah, you got 8. And this was also interesting because their ability in things like the formal grammar was not matched through into their ability in pronunciation. And I saw a lot of students grow massively in confidence in their own ability with the pronunciation of English through this essentially business of assessing them, of testing them. But it had a huge impact. And I continued to do it until I stopped working there.
That's really interesting.
And it's easy to do now. This is the incredible thing, is because they do it on their phone and email it to you, whereas I was carrying home bags and bags of cassettes. So it's really easy to do. It's motivating for them. They enjoy doing it. By all the surveys that I did year in, year out, everyone kept saying, oh, it's so much more fun than writing an essay.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another comment here, which I think is kind of related to what we're saying about confidence. Where someone's commented that most of my students don't really care about intelligibility. They're interested in sounding like a native speaker because they think it will make them more prestigious. So I definitely think in some places, being able to sound like a native speaker, even though it might not be the easiest, or it might not be related to intelligibility, it still does have a prestige mark around it. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, and whether there's a way to I guess address that. Robin, go on.
No, it's just that if you look at all of the international exam boards now, none of them in their criteria for speaking, no international exam board references candidates to native speaker English. They all reference them to intelligibility. So at a purely pragmatic level, students do need to be told that when you go to be examined, you will be examined on your intelligibility. Native speakers are automatically highly intelligible. No, they're not. And there are many, many instances, and there's research work showing that when English is being used as an international language, the native speaker can often be the fly in the ointment, the most difficult person to understand and the person who least understands the other accents. So these are sort of like two sets of facts. These are reality today that students might need to be introduced to slowly and with tact. If they've come through the system oriented towards native speakerness in their accent as the only way of demonstrating they've been successful. So there's a bit of work to be done there by us as teachers to get students to start rethinking what it is they should aim for. If at the end of all of that, they still insist they want to sound like a native speaker, well, okay, as Małgosia's already said this, this is our job. We're in there to help them achieve their goals. But they also do need to decide, therefore, which native speaker. And then you need to tell them about success rates. and they're absolutely abysmally low.
That's that's really interesting.
Well, I personally relate to that comment because, in a way, this idea or this perception of prestige is self-inflicted. In a way, it's what they think, what the student thinks, that it will be more. Nobody's saying that it sounds more prestigious. Like in my case, nobody was saying. And I'll take your reference, Robin. I mean, I speak flawlessly. In the end, this sense of prestige or this sense of perfect way of speaking is self-inflicted. Probably what the teacher needs to drive is the focus in the objective, as you said, Robin, but what the real objective is, which in this case is to be intelligible and to be able to put the message through, to express what you want to say as clearly as possible, regardless of the pronunciation. As long as you can do that, I mean, take your message forward, that's the important thing, without any perception, without probably any subjectivity on how do you perceive yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. I've got one person in the comment. Tell them to be careful. I have one student who model Al Pacino. That just
Penelope Cruz.
I listen most mornings. I listen to the BBC, to Radio 4, and I'm shocked how many times I really struggle to understand native speakers, and I'm one of them. So we do need this work that needs doing in ELT about who is the native speaker, and ultimately I'd like us to get rid of this differentiation between native and non-native speaker. It's not helpful at all. You have people who are competent users of English and people who are not. And some of the people who are not competent users will have been born in countries all around the world, and some of them will have been born in the US, and some of them will have been born in the UK. And the same is true of competent speakers. And our job is to take people who are learning the language through to being competent speakers, and who can do this accommodation that Małgosia was talking about before, who can adjust their pronunciation so that they're maximally intelligible wherever it is they happen to be speaking at that point in time. And some native speakers need help in order to be maximally intelligible wherever they are. I think I might set up a course actually for native speakers.
Please do. We've got we're running close to the end of our time, so I think that's a wonderful note to end on. So I just wanted to say thank you all for joining us. It's been great having the three of you here to talk about this. It's been great hearing about all your stories. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone else in the audience has too. And thanks to everyone in the audience for sharing your stories, for getting involved. It's really great to see how many of you have been sharing your own thoughts and experiences. And sorry if we couldn't get to one of your comments. I was going through trying to find them, and there's just so many. I really love reading what you all have to say. So thank you all. Thanks everyone for getting involved. And yes, we hope you have a wonderful future of learning and teaching English, in which pronunciation plays a very positive part. So if you like this session, then we'd really appreciate it if you liked it. If you love this session, make sure to love it. And please do share it as well, as if you know a teacher that needs this in their life, that would benefit from it, do tag them in the comments, as it really does help us out. We also want to make these sessions all about you, our teaching community. So comment telling us what you would like us to talk about next. Make sure you're following us as well, so you don't miss any of these sessions in future. We're at OUP-ELT Global on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. That's at OUP-ELT Global. If you want to share your own language learning journey as well, we've got a link down in the comments where you can do that and where you can find out more about our approach to helping you find the words. So yes, if you want to share your own language learning journey, do follow that link. And also, if you would like to download our position paper on teaching pronunciation for a global world, you can go there to download that too. So thank you all for joining. It's been great having you. And last but not least, a huge thank you to Sebastian, Małgosia, and Robin for joining us today. It's been really great having you here. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it.
We did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
It's been our pleasure.
much. Thank you for all the comments and questions.
Yeah, really interesting. Great to get all those comments.
Oh, it's been fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and see you next time.
Okay,
See
bye,
you.
everybody.
Have a great
Bye.
day.
Bye.